Tidecraft Boats invite you to join us on a fishing trip to Falcon Lake, located on the Texas-Mexico border. We're down in the deep south part of Texas, and there you get a good view of the lake. I'm Al Taylor, and we're going to give you some exciting bass fishing action and hopefully give you some tips on how to make your next fishing trip a little bit more enjoyable. We made this film in the springtime, and Falcon Lake is it's an old-timer. The lake's been around about 20 years, and one of the best bass fishing lakes you're going to find anywhere. And as you can see, we started right off and started catching a few fish. Now, that's me up there in the front of the boat. In the middle is Tommy Gray, who operates the Redwood Lodge on Falcon. Excellent fisherman and a real fine guy to be with in the boat. In the back in that yellow coat is Jim Rogers. A lot of you may have heard of Jim. He's a several times world champion bass fisherman. He and his wife were husband and wife champions in many tournaments. He's from Lamar, Missouri. It's the first time Jim or myself had ever been down to Falcon, and we were very surprised at the kind of fishing we ran into. As you can see, we had a little fog that morning. We got out real early, and fortunately the bass were cooperating a little bit. And Jim's hanging on to one right there. And we're doing mostly worm fishing and fishing fairly shallow water. The water we were fishing in was in 5 to 10 feet. As I mentioned, this was springtime, and the bass were up in the shallows trying to spawn. Most of them, however, hadn't spawned yet, as the weather had been kind of cool. That's pretty good bass Jim's got there. Now, these fish that we were catching, they were averaging a good size, which surprised me. That's about a 4-pound bass that Jim has there. The lake is over. It was built on the Rio Grande River, which of course divides the United States and Mexico, and it's some 40 to 50 miles long. There's one of your finer bass fishing rigs that you're ever going to run into. Well, I finally got one up there in the front. These are scrappy fish, and we were finding them right along the little brush rows and little lines of old mesquite brush. And as I said, the water there was fairly shallow. It was about 4 or 5 feet deep, and catching them on worms. I think probably purple and grape seemed to be our best colors that we had our best luck with. That boat we're fishing out of is the Mr. Pro model, manufactured by Tidecraft, 16 feet long, and it's really an excellent fishing machine. Very comfortable for 3 people to fish out of. You can get into those real hard to get to places, and it has all the luxuries and accessories that you're ever going to want on any kind of good fishing boat. I like fishing up there in the front. You get to hit all those good spots first, but it didn't seem to be doing me much good that day. I think Tommy and Jim Rogers were kind of putting it on me. As you can see, these fish really were scrappy. Well, Tommy's getting the live box open already. He's pretty confident Jim's going to get that one in the boat. These are nice fat fish. This lake doesn't get fished a whole lot. It's quite a ways from any big population centers. Tommy Gray, who operates the Redwood Lodge, the lodge is located in Zapata, Texas. There's that good bass rig again. Look at the string of fish that man has. I think most of them are crappie, however. They do allow the Mexicans to run nets, gill nets, and other type of fish traps, and that he is or was a commercial fisherman. But Zapata, Texas is a very small little town, and if you ever want to make a trip down to Falcon, I'd recommend you do it in the cooler months. It gets pretty hot down there in the summertime. Tommy had a big chaw of tobacco there, and I was always nervous that I was going to get caught with one of them whenever he let go of some of it, but he never did hit me. Now I've got a good fish on here, and in fact I was wondering there for a minute who had who. But it's a pretty good fish. And I could tell it was an old mama bass. She didn't want to jump, and she was full with eggs, and she just didn't want to come out of the water, but she kept trying to get over there in the bush, and I'm trying to keep her out of it. But it's a pretty good bass. And I was telling Tommy, you better get a hold of her quick, because I don't want you to lose her. And that one surprised me. I didn't think it was that heavy, but it weighed 7 pounds when we got in that evening. But it was a nice fish. You don't catch them that big very often, at least I don't. Tommy's thrown right back in there. He says, I think I'm going to get its mate. Started to tell you a little bit about that Tidecraft boat. It has 2 elevated pedestal chairs with armrests. And there, by the way, there's our stringer from the first day. We quit kind of early that day. The weather was kind of cool and kind of wet, and we decided we were going to go in and get warmed up. That isn't a bad string of fish for about 8 hours fishing. That boat has 2 elevated fishing chairs, and then the middle chair, the driver's chair, can also be elevated. The standard Mr. Pro model comes with 2 live wells, long storage box with built-in rod racks, has a front compartment for your battery for your trolling motor. Just an excellent all-around boat, and it sure does take that rough water real nice. This is an old village that where the inhabitants had to be moved when the lake was built. And the lake is down a little bit right now. Normally, a lot of those buildings are completely underwater. We decided we'd go over and see if there were any bass and had moved into the town. But it was very scenic and very interesting to us. This was an old church, which was some 150 years old. And as of course you can see, is now part of the lake. Big Jim Rogers, Big Jim as we call him, because he weighs about 280 pounds, is quite a fisherman. He owns a lure manufacturing company called Rogers Lures, and makes a complete line of fishing lures. In fact, we were using most of his lures when we were fishing here at Falcon. We'll throw those little ones back. This, I should mention, this is the next morning. You see, we finally got a little sunshine, and fishing slowed down a little bit. I don't know, they were hitting better in that foggy, cloudy weather. But we went way back up in a creek, and you saw a shot of some ducks there. The ducks just covered up this lake back in the creeks. There were just ducks everywhere in there, and we were kind of sorry the duck season wasn't open. We were hitting these little brushy spots, putting worms back up in there, far back as the brush we could get. That seemed to be where most of the fish were laying. And as I mentioned, this was in the early spring and starting to warm up a little bit. I wouldn't recommend you go down there in July and August, because it does get hot. Wintertime is an excellent place to go. Highways down, leading down to Falcon are all excellent, and it's a great place to go down and spend a little time in the wintertime when you want to get away from the cold weather. Here we're jigging straight up and down in some little brush tops, and once again the water was, it was only 4 or 5 feet deep, and these bass were laying right down in the top of those bushes. We'd just pull up to one, drop that worm right there on top of them, and twitch it up and down a few times, and if there was a bass there, you had him. Some of them just about like to yank the rod out of your hand when they grab it. Jim Rogers fishes many of the professional bass tournaments and has had an excellent record of finishing them in very, very high in the money in many of them. And he, like I say, he's quite a character. He really keeps the dialogue going. Always has competition going on who's going to catch next fish and the biggest one and so forth. There's one of those pintails. I was surprised how scrappy these fish were. Boy, they really like to fight. We were trying to save a few fish. We were going to have a fish fry that evening. Tommy promised him if we'd catch them, he'd cook them. And I'll never pass up any deal like that. Those are nice fish. Most of them running that we're keeping running around 2.5, 3 pounds. The lake was somewhat murky while we were there. They'd had a lot of rain. Of course, the Rio Grande does get very muddy when it does rain. So we were hoping we could catch some on topwaters, and the lake is an excellent topwater lake. But at this particular time, it seemed like worms, and we did catch a few on spinner baits, and I think here in a few minutes you'll see some fish caught on spinners. There's a blue heron that was out doing a little fishing of his own, only he had a some kind of snake there, and I was glad he flew the other way. Tidecraft has dealers in most of the areas, and they make these boats over in Minden, Louisiana. And if there is not a dealer in your area, you would write Tidecraft boats in Minden. They have a very large factory there, so I don't think you need much more address than that. Just write Tidecraft, Minden, Louisiana. They'd be happy to send you out. Ooh, there's another friend. They'd be happy to send you out a brochure on all their boats. They make several different types of bass boats along with ski boats. And they have a very interesting boat they call the Miss Pro, which is very similar to the same hull as this boat we have here, only it can be converted to a ski boat for those of you who have that kind of problem. There's a fish on a spinnerbait. A little later in the day, we pulled up into a cove and started throwing some spinnerbaits at the bank, and we caught a few pretty good fish on the spinnerbaits. The chartreuse and the bright yellow color seem to be the best. Tidecraft also makes their own trailer for this boat, and it is the best loading trailer that I've ever seen. You just can't miss it when you put it on there. There's that bright chartreuse spinnerbait. But the trailer and the boat, which makes a beautiful combination, it's hard to beat. This is just about the end of a perfect fishing weekend. Once again, I'd like to mention this film has been brought to you by Tidecraft, located in Minden, Louisiana. And I hope you'll go down and hunt up your Tidecraft.